There are 14 data types right over here, which we are going to talk about: string, variable, const, integer, double, number, boolean, null, final, dynamic list, array, set, and map. This is the data types that we are going to talk about. And one more thing is that you have to pay a really close attention to this topic, because this is one of the most important topics. So whenever you're writing code, you have to think about a certain scenario in which you wanted to store your value in. So for now, we'll move on to what is a string and variable is. So I don't know if you guys know any coding language or not. So we are going to use the common language that we all know. For example, let's start with English. Whenever we are writing a word, it could be a single word, right? For such as a book could be a single word, your name could be a word, an apple could be a word. Whenever you're writing it, you don't initializing by saying it. So for example, in the Dart programming language, we have to say that I wanted to store this value. It's the English letter or a word that I wanted to store my value in. So for that, we use something called as a variable, which is short for where. I have a sentence. For that, you can use something called as string, which is short for str. In the string, you can insert multiple words in that. In the variable, you can insert one word in that. So variable can do much more than that. For now, just think about a variable can store only one value. Whenever you have learned the English language, there is another language that you commonly use, which is called as numbers, right? So whenever we are storing a data in numbers in Dart programming language, we have to initializing by saying that this is the number that I wanted to save, because words, sentences, and numbers are a different thing in this programming language and all the languages, as you know, right? For example, you might have 100,000 or 1 million, a particular number which doesn't have a breakpoint. You call that an integer over here. And we have one more number we commonly use, which is known as decimal numbers, which has a breakpoint in it. So we call that in Dart programming language double. There is a data type called num, which you can store a decimal numbers or a continuous number. So what is a boolean? For example, you'll have certain scenarios where you wanted to check if the condition is true or not. So basically, boolean is true or not. How do you name a data type? As we have discussed earlier, you can name your data type by initializing it by saying it, this is the first word, like integer. I wanted to store a number value in that, a name of age, and after that, I have actually provided the value that I wanted to save in that data type. So this is how you name your data types whenever you are defining something. If you notice something over here, you might be thinking that this is an integer value and I am giving it a name of a variable or a string, right? So it doesn't matter what you name your data type. The thing that matters is the most is that what the value that you're actually providing. Here, I'm not breaking the rules and I'm providing the value of 25 because this is an integer value. And over here, I have named my topic one topic. So I'm using an integer value here and I'm giving it a name. So it doesn't necessarily matter how you name your data type. The thing that matters most is that you have to provide the actual value. So what is a null? Null safety is one of the most important topics in Dart. So think about that. You have initialized a data type called int, and after that you have given it a name of age, and in that value section you have leave it blank. You haven't provided any value onto that. So when you actually run your application, that integer value is empty. So that is what we call null. So in certain scenarios, what happens is that many people try to create some data types. Later on, they wanted to store the values in. So because they haven't stored the value onto that data type, the application will crash. So that is the reason Dart programming language has one of the features is called null safety. Let's discuss about what is a list and an array. First of all, just think that you have a bag. In that bag, you have a couple of oranges, some vegetables, milk, and some groceries. That bag can have multiple values, right? So you have created your application. Now you wanted to store multiple values, such as integer values, variable, and boolean values, and many values more. You wanted to store it in a particular place. So you can use something called as list. So because of the type inference, the list will know this is an integer or this is a data type. We use list in order to store multiple values, such as like string, variables, etc. So what is an array then? Basically, the list of items is what we call an array. What is list, set, and map? List can have duplicate items. For example, you have integer value which is 10. You can have multiple integer value which are 10 in a list, but in a set you can have that integer value once. If that value is repeating, the set will ignore that value, because set is what we call unique set of items. Map is something that we call a key and a value which has in it. A key should be always unique and the value that you can provide multiple times. So this is what list, set, and map is. Function. A function is nothing but an object that does only one thing what you tell it to. For example, you have a remote control on your home. If you have pressed 1 on the key, you'll only get 1. You'll not get 2. That particular number 1 has been assigned onto that key. That is the reason a function can only do one thing, nothing more, nothing less. So the function will do whatever you want it to do. A function can multiply a value. A function can return a value. A function can create a box. A function can take you to another step ahead. So a function does only one thing. So basically, function does only one thing, nothing more, nothing less. You might be thinking, is there any data type which can store all of these values? So there is a data type called const which can store all of these values, and there's one more data type which is called final which can store all of these values as well. So what is the differences between constant and final? So example, you have an integer value of 10. Later on, if you have assigned it with const, later on you cannot change that value. So const cannot be modified. For such as final, final cannot be modified as well. So what is the difference between these two? if you have an application, in that application, if you have defined const, that const, if you have used that value or not, which you have assigned it by the const, will consume some memory. For such as final, you haven't used that data type. Memory will not be allocated to the application because you haven't used that data type. So this is the difference between const and final. One more thing is that you cannot directly use const keyword in a class. For using a const keyword, you have to use something called as static. As when we talk about static members and functions, you are going to understand what is a constant and what is a final. We are going to talk about operators now. So there are 5 types of operators. One is called relational operator, and second is called unary operator. Third is called logical operator. Fourth is called null aware operator, and fifth is called shortcut operator. So we'll start with operators first. What are operators? So you have a calculator on your phone. If you have added 2 values, you use a plus operator over there. So that is what operators over here are. So whenever you wanted to add 2 values, you can use a plus symbol, and whenever you wanted to see 2 values which are greater than or lesser than, you can use greater than symbol or lesser than symbol. So if you wanted to divide some values and you wanted to get an integer value, if you are getting a double value, you wanted to get an integer value, for that you have to use tilde/. This is what we call interdivision operator. What are relational operators? So whenever you see two codes which have some similarities, you need to check that if the value is equal or not. For that you use equal to or not. If you wanted to see not equal to, you have to use exclamation point and equals to, and if you wanted to see greater than, you have to use greater than equals to. If you wanted to see less than, you have to use less than equals to. So this is how you basically use relational operators. So unary operator is basically, we have initialized a variable called age, and after that adding the value after creating the variable, that is what we call post increment. Adding the value before creating a value, which is called pre-increment. Adding before and adding after, that is what we call unary operators. It is logical operator in our programming language, and or not. We use this operator to check if two conditions is true or not, and for that we can use and or. Syntax will be that ampersand and 2 vertical lines. You can use any of them. So why we use this operator? For example, I have given you a task to go ahead and bring me some coffee along with some cookies. So this is the 2 tasks that you have to complete. What you have done is that you have got me a coffee, not the cookies. So one condition is true, another condition is false. So in that scenario, we use and or in order to check if true conditions is true or not. Null aware operator, as we have discussed earlier, whenever we have created an integer value or a variable, we need to check if the application is crashing, if that value is empty or not. For that, we can use question mark along with a dot in order to check if the data type is null or not. And if the data type is null, we use 2 question marks, and after that the value to assign in that variable. If you know that the variable is empty and you directly wanted to assign a new value, all you can do just type the name of that integer or a variable, and after that use 2 question marks and equals to, and directly assign the value that you wanted to assign. So this is what we call null aware operator. Shortcut operators. You have a numbers and you wanted to multiply that number by 2. For that you have to do numbers equals to, and after that numbers into to 2. So you might be thinking, is there any shortcut to write that code? So there's a shortcut for that. So once you have seen numbers, and after that just into, and after that equals to 2, then the number will be multiplied by 2. So we use this shortcut in order to multiply value in certain scenarios. So what is conditional statements? Let me give you a real life scenario. You have downloaded application. In order for you to use that application, you have to log in or you have to sign up. These 2 are the conditions that you have to follow in order to open the application. So in the login screen, what happened is that if you are logged in, if login is true, then you'll send it back to the home page. Else if the login is false, you'll be redirected back to the login page. So if you are not logged in, and if the program doesn't know if you are logged in or not, it will send you back to a sign up page. So that is what we call else. This is what we call conditional statements. If, else if, and else.